Hello, my name is Carlise Anderson. I'm a policy fellow with SisterReach, and I will be your moderator today. I would like to welcome all of you, to reproductive justice polling in the South, what Black women think in Tennessee and Alabama. This is a conversation centered on Black women and their right to reproductive autonomy. We will address reproductive justice issues that affect Black women wellness and provide policy guidance to organizers and advocates in Alabama and elected officials in the Deep South. I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Programming will be brought to you by SisterReach, a Memphis, Tennessee-based grassroots organization supporting reproductive autonomy of women and teens of color, poor and rural women, LGBTQ+ and GNC folk, and their families through the framework of reproductive justice. Our mission is to empower our base to lead healthy lives, raise healthy families, and live in healthy and sustainable communities. We work from a four-pronged strategy of education, policy, and advocacy, culture shift, and harm reduction, and our partners in our own voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, a national organizational initiative and policy partnership designed to amplify and lift the voices of Black women at the national and regional levels in our ongoing fight to secure reproductive justice for women and girls. This webinar continues our series of polling briefings as we expand our base of engagement and influence across the Deep South and paint a picture of what Black women really think about political issues that are impacting our bodies, families, and lives. This webinar series centers the voices, experience, and views of Black women in Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas, and should be used to promote visibility of leadership and political views of Black women. In our own voice, polling data analyzes the apprehensions and sentiments of Black women. It is important to note that this conversation is rare. Research and polling data on Black women seldomly occur, and it is the goal of In Our Own Voice and SisterReach to provide tangible data for the communities whose lives are most impacted by poor policy decisions and cultural humility deficiency. We want our local, state, and federal leaders to hear our stories, to understand our concerns, and most importantly, to review data that will generate policy and structural change that will allow Black women to lead more abundant lives. We thank you for tuning into this webinar to discuss the disproportionate health disparities and reproductive oppressions that our communities continue to experience, especially in a time of COVID-19. There's a lot at stake. We will continue to express our concerns and priorities as we navigate through systemic racism, this global pandemic, and an ongoing assault on Black and Brown people by police. Today, we will be joined by Marcella Howe, the founder and president of In Our Own Voice, who will present the polling data for Alabama. After Marcella's presentation, we will continue the discussion with leading remarks from Cherisse Scott, founder and CEO of SisterReach, Lori Bertram Roberts, the executive director of Yellow Hammer Found, Renisha Rusaw, executive director of the Ordinary People Society, and Monica Edwards, federal policy manager at URGE. Thank you all for being here today. Before the start of the presentation, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules. We anticipate that you all might have questions regarding the data, so we will reserve a 10-minute time slot for questions. During the presentation, however, the chat box will be disabled on Zoom. If you are watching via Facebook, you may post questions during that time through the comment section. Now let's get into the data that brought us all here. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker, Marcella Howe, founder and president of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, who will present the polling data results.
Thank you, Charlize. I want to talk first about the polling methodology. I'm not going to go into all the different kind of details of it, but I want to let you know, as Charlize mentioned, we did polling across different states in the South. And in doing that, we selected to do 500 Black women in each of the states, something that rarely happens. Usually Black women are part of a larger poll where they're being compared to what white women think or others. And we decided we really wanted to find out just what Black women in the South, in these southern states, thought about things. And as Charlize said, we did Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee for this project. Of those 500 Black women, 70% of them were voters. Next, okay. In Alabama, Black people are 27% of the population. And of that 27%, 53% are women and girls, and 47% are men and boys. Next. We asked a question, much of our questioning focused around having access to abortion rights and family planning and what that meant in people's lives as they thought about starting families or expanding their families. We asked a question specifically about Roe v. Wade, which was the Supreme Court decision that established a woman's constitutional right to have an abortion. And we know that that constitutional right is in jeopardy now as the Supreme Court has taken a specific conservative term. So we asked people exactly what they thought the Supreme Court should do, whether it should overturn a woman's constitutional right to have an abortion, or if they should leave it as is and allow women to make those decisions about what they did with their bodies. 73% of Alabama Black women said that the Supreme Court should uphold Roe v. Wade and allow women to make the decisions. Next. We also asked a question about financial security, specifically to see how women viewed abortion rights versus their own ability to build security for their families. And we found that nearly 95% of Black women that we talked to said the control over childbearing, that is, when they started their family, when they expanded their family, was very important for financial security. We also, so we looked at the financial security of the Black people, Black women specifically, in Alabama. In Alabama, 31% of Black families live in poverty. 76% of those Black families are headed by single women. 83% of Black women in Alabama have high school diplomas or more education. So the poverty issue is not about not having the education to be more successful. Next slide. However, it may indeed be about the wage gap in Alabama. Black women in Alabama make 57 cents to every dollar a white man makes doing the same job. That means over her lifetime, a Black woman in Alabama will lose $862,920 over her lifetime because of this wage gap. It also means that in order to catch up with a white man who retires from his job at 65, a Black woman would have to work until she was 90 years old. So think about that. This is really important. She would be working still until she is 90 in order to just catch up to what a white man made when he retired at 65. We know that 73% of the respondents in Alabama that we talked to have children. And so we also asked a specific question. We asked them what they thought should be part of basic health care. And 92% said care for pregnant women, both prenatal and postnatal. 88% said contraception should be part of healthcare. Remember, we were asking them specific questions about when they wanted to start a family or expand their family. And 55% said that abortion care should also be part of basic healthcare, all in majorities. So we asked them a question about what things went into decisions about becoming a parent or expanding their families. 62% said access to a living wage job. 57% said they considered racism in their community around making decisions about whether or not to become a parent. 54% said affordable health care was really important. 54% said having access to good child care was important so that they continue to work. 52% said affordable housing, making sure that they could provide a comfortable home for their children. 50% said having access to quality and healthy food for their child. And then 39% said over-policing in their community did impact their decision about whether or not to start a family. Next. So we wanted to explore racism. We thought it was really important, given the things that have been going on in our country around racial protest and racial justice. 48% of the people we talked to, the women we talked to, said racism had had a negative effect on their mental and emotional health. 34% said racism had a negative effect on their physical health. And then we also looked at what younger women, people between the ages of 18 and 34 said, and 59%, well over half, said that racism had a big impact on their mental and emotional health. Next. We also looked at over-policing in Alabama, especially given what has happened in what has really been, I shouldn't say what has happened just in this year, but what has been exposed in this year about over-policing and police brutality. 39% of the Black women said, as I mentioned before, that over-policing factored into decisions about having a child. And then with younger women, 18 to 34, said that over-policing factored into their decision about having a child. That was 12 percentage points higher than women of older ages. We also wanted to know from people, if they decided to have an abortion, what they felt women should be able to get, what kind of environment they thought women should have in trying to get an abortion. 83% said that the procedure should be simple. Access to the procedure should be simple. 82% said it should be affordable, meaning that they believe that their health care should cover it. 78% said that people they encountered when they went to get an abortion should be respectful of their decision and not try to talk them out of it. 73% said they felt that a physician or a nurse practitioner, somebody in their community, should be available to provide abortion services. And then 70% said that abortion services should be available to them as soon as possible once they made up their mind to have one. Next. We also asked people about what they thought about abortion rights. And this was really fascinating. We asked them a simple question about whether or not abortion rights was legal in Alabama. And as you can see from the slide, it's split in three. 33% said yes, they thought it was legal. 33% said no, they thought it was illegal to seek an abortion in Alabama. And 34% said they were unsure. Think about that. People really did not know. They either thought that abortion was illegal or they were unsure, which in and of itself impacts whether or not people think they have access to treatment. Next. We also asked them what they thought was, the risk in their country, in the country, and also in Alabama. 65% of the women said that they thought the right to abortion in our country overall was at risk. 30% said that they thought it was fairly secure. This was, and I should add, this survey happened before the most recent justice was put on the Supreme Court that really tilted the court from being somewhat balanced to being overwhelmingly anti-abortion. 69% said that the right to abortion in Alabama is at risk, while 29% said they thought it was fairly secure. And then 60% said even if they thought it was secure, they thought it was becoming harder to access abortion in Alabama. And 8% said that it was becoming easier, and 30% said they weren't really sure. Next. We also asked, and before I go past that, I want to talk about something else. The reason why people really felt, can you go back to the other slide? Yeah. If you think about what happens in Alabama, there are a lot of restrictions on seeking an abortion in Alabama. So if a woman decides she wants an abortion, she is required to listen to state mandated lectures, basically, from the physician that is designed to discourage her from getting an abortion. She has to then leave and wait, has a waiting period before she can come back and actually access the abortion. The Affordable Care Act, healthcare, the healthcare exchange in Alabama forbids using your money for an abortion services, just as Medicaid nationally, but also in Alabama, you cannot use your Medicaid insurance to get an abortion unless your life is at risk. And there are also other kinds of restrictions that people hear all the time. Like in Alabama, it is illegal to get an abortion after 20 weeks of a pregnancy unless your life is at risk. And many people don't really realize that they are pregnant until late in the pregnancy, at least the first 3 months. And so when they try to go get an abortion, if they decide they want to terminate a pregnancy, they run into these different kinds of barriers. And some of those barriers are also about how many clinics there are in the state, right? And I should add that the majority of counties in Alabama do not have abortion facilities in them. Now we can go to the next one. So we asked the question again about who should make the decision about whether or not you seek an abortion, you can get an abortion. And women were very, very specific. They did not think lawmakers should have a role in that. They basically said that the woman, the person involved, should make the decision about how and when to get an abortion. Who she contacts or talks to about that decision should be her right and not someone else. And 59% of the people we talked to said that they would likely support candidates who support abortion rights. Next. Because we know that Alabama is very religious across the board, but we also know that Black communities are very religious, we asked a question about whether or not the women we talked to, felt that getting abortion services was a religious issue for them. 60% said it was not. They said that it was a health issue. 80% of the women we talked to, even if some of them said it was a religious issue, they also said that it could be a very responsible choice depending on the circumstances. And a full 83% of them said that they rejected the idea of abortion stigma and people shaming folks about getting an abortion. Next. So now I'm going to turn the webinar back over to Carlise, who will introduce the panelists actually she'll introduce Cherisse first, and then the panelists to sort of comment on this data for Alabama. Thank you. Cherisse?
Carlise, we don't have you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Marcella, for highlighting these important findings. We will now hear from SisterReach founder and CEO Cherisse Scott, sharing with us how this polling data plays a role in our work at SisterReach on the ground and in the Deep South.
Thanks so much for all of this information. I think again, and welcome to all who have joined, as well as I'm so excited about the panel, our partners in Alabama who are here. You know, as Marcella said, we've done these types of polling. opportunities in multiple states in the Southeast. And I think what continues to be like this continuous thread is that at the very core of Black women's health and wellness, we are able to make the best decisions for ourselves if and when we want to expand our families. And we don't necessarily need a proxy, a mediator, a legislator, our husband, our boyfriend, anyone to help us make that decision, especially when we are really left to navigate so many other decisions about our overall wellness as women, as in our families, over our children, our decisions around our business alone. And I think that these stats continue to speak to that, especially if 57% of the 27% of Black folks in Alabama identify as women or girls. And understanding that clearly Black women recognize that, hey, if we need to make decisions about getting abortion procedures, we want to keep them legal and safe. I think also understanding not only the historical kind of background around Black women not having access to abortions, but I think that we need to put a lens of a Southern lens on what that means for Southern Black women to have not had access to safe and legal abortions in the country before the protections of Roe v. Wade. I think, again, something that we're seeing in other states that we're also seeing in Alabama is that our ability to take care of ourselves, our ability to have a job where we don't have to work 3 and 4 jobs, or we can work a job that is, going to be able to sustain ourselves, our families, and the needs of our households is imperative. Though we still have a pretty significant amount of Black Alabamians who live in poverty, with the understanding that the majority of those folks are Black women, and that Black women are still expected to run our households, lead our households. And so, so this, again, just continues to speak to not only Black women's resilience, and our resistance and our ability to continue to do the work that we need to do for ourselves and for our communities, but it also continues to speak to this kind of pattern of abandonment that Black women are expected to navigate and live our lives and raise our children and be healthy and. I thought that the racism statistic was very important, especially among 18 to 34-year-old women. We're talking about millennials now. We're talking about people who will or will not make decisions to have families or expand their families based on safety, based on whether or not they feel like their children bringing a child into this world will be an unsafe situation versus not expanding families. And I want to just really lift up again that reproductive justice's intent isn't just to center abortion, it's also to center our rights to have children, our rights to be able to have a quality of life before, during, and after our ability to parent. We've got to be able to know that we've got a safe environment for our communities, a safe environment for our families, a safe environment for ourselves. And those scenarios absolutely do dictate whether or not we're going to have a child, and really, let's take it back, that whether or not we're going to become pregnant, right? And if we become pregnant, if we're going to remain pregnant. I think that, again, something else that continues to be a thread is that Black women want to parent, right? But Black women don't feel supported that if they become pregnant, that they will be healthy, that they will be healthy while they are pregnant, that the baby will be healthy when it's born, and that ultimately the success of the family will be something that is centered in abundance, an abundant kind of outlook for Black women. I think the other piece that I wanted to lift up that, of course, was important to me, a couple of things that were important. It was the fact that 63% of Black women wanted to be able to make the choices around their reproductive health care services and would support candidates that will continue to honor those decisions. But of course, as I work here at SisterReach, hold on, let me make sure I see. But of course, since our work here at SisterReach is so deeply centered on faith-based organizing, I thought it was really important to lift up that Black women in Alabama, still a very conservative state, or at least that's the way that it is perceived because of the types of laws and restrictions that we see, the ways that religious freedoms have been impacted. Nevertheless, when it comes down to whether or not folks identify as people of faith or not, when it comes to their health decisions, they're going to make the best kind of common sense decision that works for them and works for their family. So I'll stop there, and I really enjoyed Alabama. Like Alabama and Kentucky kind of rose to the top as pretty similar, but Alabama Black women seem to be far more progressive in that particular piece around their understanding of religion. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Cherisse. We will now hear responsive remarks from each panelist, and a discussion will follow. Each speaker will have approximately 3 minutes to respond briefly to how they believe this polling data reflects the community of Alabama and the effect that it has on their advocacy work. Lori, given the recent confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the presence of a 6-3 conservative majority of the U.S. Supreme Court, many fear that Roe versus Wade will be overturned. Can you share what will happen in Alabama if Roe is overturned? Are there barriers to access regardless of what is at stake with the Supreme Court that you're witnessing in your work? And how does the Yellow Hammer Fund work to address these barriers?
Okay, first of all, I got my granddaughter. I want to thank Marcella and Cherisse for putting into stats what we already know on the ground in Alabama, right? We already know these things. We already know that people don't actually know whether or not abortion is legal here. It's one of the reasons why abortion funds all over the country have the first thing on their answering machine is abortion is still legal in insert state, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, right? Arkansas, Kentucky, go on and on and on. Because we know that it's not just that that these bans already exist. It's that every year states sow confusion by putting up these nefarious bills that never go anywhere, and media report on them and report on them and report on them and report on them. But you get 8 times as much reporting on the clinic is going to close, all the clinics are going to close, abortion's going to not be legal. But you get like one report that says that never went anywhere, right? So you constantly have this drumbeat of abortion is not going to be legal, abortion is not safe, abortion is not, this clinic is being closed, these doctors are being cited. It's always these anti-abortion messaging in media versus when none of that stuff happens, you don't really hear about it, right? So you constantly, it's in Mississippi and Alabama. I just came over from Mississippi to work in Alabama, but I've constantly been on the ground working in Alabama for the last 8 years. So there's that. One of the things that concerns us about Roe being overturned is that what we already know from working in what's already pretty much a post-Roe existence in Alabama, right? People already do not have access. There's only 4 clinics providing abortion care in the state. One of them only provides medical abortion. That's in Birmingham. Most clinics are not open every day because of lack of provider access to providers that are there. Almost no providers are community-based. West Alabama Women's Center is trying to have a community-based provider, but the state is putting up roadblocks to giving them their medical license because of course they are, right? So when Roe falls, or if Roe falls, then you're talking about all of these people who currently have access to a clinic that's 2 hours away, 3 hours away, which is already a huge burden, a huge restriction, will now have to go all the way to Atlanta, all the way to, if Atlanta even stays, all the way to Florida, all the way to Illinois, right? You're talking about 8-hour trips, 9-hour trips, where we're already talking about 6-hour round trips. Because whenever I talk about 3-hour trips, I want people to understand that's a 6-hour round trip in a day, an 8-hour round trip. It's a 48-hour waiting period. You can't just come, stay the night, and then get your abortion the next day, right? It's 48 hours. So that's problem number one. The other thing I see changing if Roe falls is that you're going to see an uptick in self-managed abortion. And that's when you do your abortion yourself at home, usually with pills. Misoprostol is the most popular way. Misoprostol is everywhere. Like literally, it's prescribed for all kinds of things. You can also order it on the internet. When we're talking about Gen Z, which is not millennials, that's younger than millennials, that's my youngest kids' ages, they are not uncomfortable with ordering pills online. They are not uncomfortable with taking pills at home. This generation is not going to be shy about doing self-managed abortion. Um, our fear is, and a valid fear, is that the criminalization of self-managed pregnancy is going to fall on the heads of Black and brown women, Black women specifically, because it already has, right? Criminalization of pregnancy already falls disproportionately on us. Criminalization of women who are struggling with drug addiction, they're already criminalized during pregnancy. Women who are suspected of performing an abortion during pregnancy have already been criminalized. So just like see that as a surge, possibly, if we're going to this post-Roe existence where people are having to DIY their abortions. And I would say that is our greatest concern, even more so than will people be able to access that thing. I know that our community is resilient, right? I know that we have traditions and networks, and will that serve everybody? No. But what I'm really concerned about is that we're going to go into a state of being where people will be largely criminalized.
Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing that insight with us. Rodrisha, women are twice as likely to experience mental health conditions. In Alabama, more than 50% of Black women are concerned with their emotional well-being. According to the Bureau of Prisons, 10 in every 100,000 women will lose their life to suicide. Can you share how healing spaces contribute to improving mental health, the reduction of recidivism, and strengthening the Black motherhood?
Yes, and thank you for having me today. And you are very correct. And it is 10 in every 100,000 people, especially women, commit suicide. And this piece on mental illness is very important to our reentry system and reducing recidivism in not only just the state of Alabama, but all over the world. What we have found is that women that enter the penal system normally struggle, 40% struggle with mental illness. And as you say, women is 50% of men that struggle out of the United States with mental illness. And what's happening is that a lot of women, especially colored women, are going into the criminal justice system without being treated for mental illness. And when they enter into the system, we all know that there is treatment within being incarcerated. However, a lot of them still leave without insurance and health insurance to get the counseling that they need to get their mental illness on track. And so our organization, TOPS, what we do here is we not only have a reentry program for women, but we also address the mental illness crises. And, you know, just focusing, especially now in the midst of the pandemic, right now, healing is so important. I mean, we are going through a traumatic experience where people they are PSTD now. They are going through bipolar and different mental illnesses, thyroid illnesses. We can go on and forever and ever with the list. But the issue is right now is that if we do not help those provide us an area of healing and acceptance and love, we're gonna find more women being buried in this trauma and falling into the numbers of suicide attempts. And unfortunately, the generalized way that we handle mental illness clinically does not work for everybody in the Black and brown spaces, even Latino spaces. And so we've developed a healing circle through our Voices of the Violated that allows women to cultivate their experience together and strengthen each other, empower each other, especially as a woman that's come through 3 abortions and have battled through an 8-year abusive relationship. I understand what it is to be traumatized, and I understand what it is to battle with the mental illness, and not only just your mental illness, but a battling with your mates or whoever has traumatized you with mental illness. And so this is something that we really need to look at. And in order to lower the recidivism rate, we must provide direct services to women coming out. A lot of people come out, they don't have a home to go through. They may have lost their father, their mother, their support system. And think about it also, they might have lost their children. Look at the cases that was just found in the state of Alabama where a testing site for drugs was fraudulently saying that women were having drugs in their system where they lost their children. I mean, look at the unjust system now. And so we have women that have lost their children and can't get their children back because they're reverting to drug and versus reverting to healing. And so we need to address, number one, the drug addiction problem here in Alabama. We need to change the marijuana laws. That must be done so that women can have adequate treatment outside of just taking pills. Because even though we know with pills, it also has side effects, and it also can heighten your anxiety and your depression and so on. So once again, I think we really need to look at this in the state of Alabama. And the only thing that we can do is challenge these laws and policies that be, and our stakeholder that influences and encourages the access to Black women and women in general not having Medicaid. Medicaid expansion reform is going to be at the top of our list. And so we must look at that. And also the anti-shackling bill here in Alabama that has never been changed yet, that women are being shackled while pregnant in jail. And so all this traumatic experiences happening in their incarceration, we never know how they feel. And so we must begin to heal in our own space, in our own centers, in our own town.
Thank you so much. That was extremely insightful. Cherisse, SisterReach is located in the Bible Belt, where legislators have long pulled from a religious standpoint when crafting legislative measures. From 48-hour waiting periods and limited access to abortion clinics, Alabama is among the many states with extreme strict abortion laws. Can you discuss the importance of separation of church and state? And why do you think that the moral argument has been viable for so long?
I think I'll start with the moral argument being viable. I think that, when we think about who is informing that moral argument, it is mostly informed by white evangelicals who continue to use biblical scripture in order to, and weaponize it to take folks' rights away. And I say this as a Christian, right? I say this as a Black woman who also identifies as a Christian. I say this as a Black woman who identifies as a Christian, who's had 3 abortions in my lifetime, is at the end of the day, me making the choice to move forward with having the abortions that I believe that I needed at the time was not something that was a haphazard decision. It wasn't something that I did not, think about intently, and also in relation to my religious understanding, right? Nevertheless, what I came up with at the end of all of that is that in making the decisions, whether or not to use birth control, whether or not to terminate a pregnancy, were all informed by my ability to be self-determining, not only as a human being, but as a Christian. Right. And so, when we think about the ways that this moral narrative continues to kind of be a wedge that separates folks from being able to make health decisions, it informs respectability and all of what Rajisha just lifted up about the ways that, that judgment and shame play into policies being created that harm people, right? Policies being created by quote unquote well-intentioned Christian folk. Who aren't necessarily taking in, who are being informed by their own bias, not the medical community, not public health standards, but their own personal biases, theological misinterpretation, and that those types of issues inform folks' abilities to craft policies, especially just like in Alabama, it's the same in Tennessee, that many of our legislators also identify as people of faith. And it is in that lens that many of the policies are being crafted. What we're not seeing is enough folks who are willing, especially out of our faith communities, to push back up on those theological misgivings and saying, and really lifting up sacred autonomy and self-determination, really at the center of the ministry of Jesus. Because we're not necessarily talking about the Muslim faith. We're not talking about Jewish folks. We're talking about Christian folk. We're talking about people who say they love the Lord, right? These are the folks who are making these decisions and are setting these policies and placing these barriers between women and people who give birth in the state of Alabama, ability to make the decisions that make the most sense for them. And so I think when we think about the separation of church and state, there absolutely has to be that separation, because as long as we have folks who are going to misuse biblical scripture, we absolutely cannot trust that those folks are going to be fair and allowing people to be self-determining, regardless of whether or not they identify as Christian or not, because we're also not dealing with an entire slate of people who identify as Christian. We're talking about some folks who don't have any belief of any kind, or we're talking about people who have other beliefs that also need to be brought into the conversation. However, what does it mean to have, this kind of evangelical, this white evangelical Christian majority informing policy, informing from the White House, to the local level? We are seeing that, and absolutely, and that these folks, we cannot separate their religious understanding from them maintaining power, and lifting up their racism, their white privilege, them wanting to maintain power and control of who is able to have children and who's not able to have children, and how many children they need to be able to have. Right. So racism is still at the core of this. White supremacy is still at the core of this, and all of that is being masked as if this is Bible, and it's not Bible. So in our work here at SisterReach, we continue to have those hard conversations with clergy across the Southeast. We continue to lift up these kind of progressive narratives that we see in biblical scripture, especially around the ministry of Jesus and Jesus centering women and women's autonomy and women's ability to be self-determining. We continue to push back on these kind of interesting theological misgivings that are not biblically sound, but they're very white supremacy sound, right? So we continue to do that work unapologetically, because somebody's got to continue. We've got to be able to do that as we continue to see religious freedoms kind of still being kind of pulled into this one understanding of this more of like the theological fascism, this kind of one way dictatorship. If you don't do it this way, if you don't believe this way, then you don't deserve to be able to parent, or you don't deserve, you don't have access to God's kind of cancel culture within the church, if you will. You don't do it our way, well then Jesus cancels you. No, that's not Bible, right? And so, so we've got to continue to push back on this piece, and that's what we continue to do, which is one of the reasons why we really wanted to work across the Southeast in this way, to continue to challenge these multiple, faith communities around these narratives, as well as legislators who are abusing these narratives in order to forward an agenda of white supremacy.
Thank you so much, Cherisse, for that. Monica, in your role as an advocate, can you tell us how women of color living in Alabama with comparatively low incomes are likely to experience intimate partner violence? Can you also share how this polling data appeals to your work to get these women to safety?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. We know, according to the CDC, that about 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced some form of intimate partner violence, or have reported some form of intimate partner violence. In 2015, in Alabama, of the 22,000 offenses, over 22,000 offenses that were reported, about 18% of those were instances of domestic violence. And we also know that overwhelmingly, a lot of times domestic violence isn't reported. And we also know that in comparison to white women, women of color, specifically Black and Indigenous women, have some of the highest rates of intimate partner violence. And Black women in particular have the highest rate of fatal homicide due to intimate partner violence. As someone who is from Alabama, from the Black Belt, who has survived intimate partner violence, I can tell you from personal experience that this data is extremely important. We know that not only stressors like poverty, but lack of health care, including abortion care, further exacerbate circumstances for those who are experiencing intimate partner violence. Being able to decide if, when, and how you parent is a reproductive justice issue. And if you are in a situation where you're experiencing violence on the daily, how can you really make that decision for yourself? We see from the polling that not only financial stability is a concern for Black women in Alabama, but also that 59% of young women in Alabama report mental and emotional impact from racism. We know that for survivors of intimate partner violence, specifically who are Black, racism and police brutality plays a part in how one may choose to navigate a situation of intimate partner violence. Again, I'll say myself, as someone as a Black woman, a young Black woman in Alabama, how would I respond to situations when I was experiencing intimate partner violence, knowing that police brutality is happening, knowing that Philando Castile was just murdered? Why would I want to call the police to come intervene in a situation of violence when I know there's an inherent systemic oppression within the policing system? And so in order to not only support those that are experiencing intimate partner violence, not only just nationally, but specifically in Alabama, I mean, we have to work both on the state, local, and federal level to make sure that there's support for survivors, and also that there is divest from policing and there's investing in community programs, healthcare, financial stability, education. In the Black Belt, it is one of the poorest areas in this whole state of Alabama. And overwhelmingly, the population are people of color, specifically who are Black. And there are people in the Black Belt who have to drive 30 minutes just to seek medical attention. We have, in my hometown of Marion, Alabama, we have like one grocery store. So it's pretty much a food desert. So there are different things that really impact the way that Black women in Alabama and Black women in the South, particularly, because a lot of times we get left out. And as they say, so goes the South, so goes the nation. Black women are overwhelmingly and continuously left out of conversations about liberation when we shouldn't be, because we know that in order for anyone to get and achieve liberation, Black women have to get liberated. And that includes non-binary femmes, that includes Black trans women. And so I would just say, specifically for intimate partner violence, like, we really have to get to a point where those who are in power in Alabama and even on the federal level are really listening to those on the ground, and specifically are listening to Black women, because as everyone already uplifted, we know what we need to make autonomous decisions and have self-determination for ourselves. And so we're telling you what we need, and your role is to listen.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you to all of our panelists, actually. Your comments were insightful and provided a unique perspective from your personal experiences in your work. And it shows how important it is to listen to Black women and other women of color as we navigate our policy and our government structural systems. Now we will open the floor for questions by the audience. Rodrisha, how can people get involved in the advocacy on the anti-shackling bill and how to improve abortion access in Alabama? What do you recommend people to do? You're mute.
I'm so sorry. Thank you for that question. First thing I would say, for anybody that is very interested and feel like that this is something that they want to get involved in, for you to connect with your leaders and organizers who's working on this, and grassroots organizations who's already fighting this. I think sometimes we come in to volunteer, we have the notion that we can make something move just with just volunteering, and you can. But the thing about it, you want to back up the people that already have the relationship with the legislators and so on, to make sure that that voice is strong. I think advocacy is going to be one of our greatest movements when it comes to this, one of our greatest moves. We must make noise. That's the first thing. No policy agenda can be pushed without noise. And so as we go into this space of protesting and rallies and town hall meetings, we must remember that we bring this anti-shackling issue to the forefront of our community and begin to educate them. And then once we do that, we definitely need to challenge the legislator. You can do that in legislation session. So once again, get plugged into organizations, as all these women are leading on this panel, that are already fighting for this issue.
Thank you so much. Lori, why do you think it's important to center the voices of Black women and ensure that they're involved in these conversations that affect their health status?
Because at the end of the day, we're disproportionately affected by any conversation around healthcare. Whatever happens is going to happen mostly to us. So anything negatively.
You're muted. You went back on mute.
Unmuted. Hold on. Okay. So ultimately, we can't be free if we're not making self-determined choices, right? So our voices have to be centered to that to happen. I've never understood the white evangelical argument that abortion is Black genocide, when you cannot be committing genocide when you are also raising the people. Like, we can't raise the babies, train the babies, love the babies, right? We're raising our people, and also because that doesn't go together, but it's just a ploy to try to peel off Black people to their side, and really to peel off Black voters to be conservative, right? Like, it really came out after Obama won, and that's when they really started pushing that narrative. So it, like, in order for us to have, like, not to have genocide, not to have eugenics in our community, not to have those attacks in our community, that conversation starts with us, and it starts with us having the ability to make self-determined choices, and our voices being listened to, and finding out what it is that we feel are the most important things for us, not just for abortion and not just for reproductive health care, but what keeps us safe in our community, what makes it safe for us to go get health care, what is safe housing, what are all of the reproductive justice things that make reproductive health care safe for us and make the outcomes from reproductive health care optimal for us.
Thank you so much. Monica, as advocates, how can we hold our elected officials accountable for upholding and influencing a reproductive justice policy agenda?
Thank you. It's like there's so many ways, and regardless of you're on the local, state, or federal level, it's all about contacting your legislators and holding them accountable, making sure they know what issues are important to you, and the ways in which you want them to legislate policy on those issues. A lot of time we have legislators, unfortunately, who try to make decisions and try to pass bills, and they have not yet done any outreach to the demographic of people who will be impacted by that bill. So how can you have a bill and legislate on, for example, maternal mortality, but you have not talked to Black women on how they have been impacted about maternal mortality? And so I think it's really about making sure that legislators are in touch with the people on the ground and making sure that the policies that they're proposing and trying to pass are actually informed by the people on the ground. That's why we have policies like, for example, to go back to intimate partner violence, like VAWA, for example. There's a lot of good in VAWA. There's a lot of funding for organizations that is needed in VAWA, but VAWA is itself a crime bill, and it fuels the unfortunate reality of mass incarceration and incarcerating Black and brown folks, particularly Black and brown cis men. And so while VAWA has some good, there's definitely ways that it can be improved, but I can guarantee you VAWA was passed and not informed by the people who were most impacted by issues of domestic and intimate partner violence. So all that just to say, contact your legislators, whether that be local, state, or federal, and make sure that they are hearing from you, because these bills will be impacting you and your life and your livelihood, and there should not be legislation being passed that is affecting people, and those people aren't having a say-so in how it's crafted.
Thank you so much. Cherisse, we have a question from a participant, and they're asking, what about a person like me who does not realize that oppression because it's not accepted? There are so many people that feel like they don't have a voice. What's a way that they can go about advocating for themselves?
I think it really comes down to, I think, one of the things that's a hindrance about this work is that folks believe that you've got to have all of the kind of academic speak in order to make the case about what it means and how to talk about it. So I'm gonna go kind of like old school church and say that we overcome by the word of our testimony, or by telling our story. And nobody's able to tell that story like you can tell your story, right? And so I think at the very core, what legislators are not getting is a very real snapshot of something that Monica lifted up, is they're not getting a very real snapshot of what's happening on the ground. By the same token, though, folks on the ground don't feel as empowered to go on the Hill, or they may not be able to go on the Hill because they're at work. But it might be just about, really reaching out to that legislator via email or sending them a letter, connecting to your local organization on the ground, like the work that URGE is doing, like the work that Rodriguez's group is doing, and making sure that those who do have the capacity to do that level of advocacy on your behalf have those tools. Those tools just meaning, you know, your stories. I think that's one of the things that's been really key about my own personal leadership in this movement, is that I didn't come to this movement as somebody who already knew all of the words to say and all of the stuff that was going on. I just knew that, you know, I had dealt with a situation where there was injustice. I wanted to get an abortion. Somebody stopped me from getting an abortion, and they used Jesus to make the case of why I couldn't do it, right? But they couldn't make they could not and they did not follow up with me to ensure that, okay, me moving forward and having my child was something that, you know, that they just didn't seem invested in. And now he's 18 years old and there's still been no investment. But legislators need to hear that. They need to hear from you, right? They need to hear that, hey, you know, you told me I was going to hell because, you know, I was having sex, and then I got pregnant, I was going to hell, and then I had the baby, I was going to hell, and I can't take care of the baby, now I'm going to hell, and my baby dead, and now I'm going to hell. So where was Jesus in the middle of that? And what was your responsibility to make sure I was straight? Right. And so we've got to be able to have those very real conversations with legislators. Hey, you want to put a 48-hour waiting period, but you know that the next hospital over for me to be able to get services is a 4-hour drive, and I don't have a car, then it's your responsibility to make sure I can get to where I need to go in order to do what I need to do. Or don't stop me from learning about my body by blocking comprehensive sex education. And then you want to shame me because I'm pregnant, or you want to shame me because I'm in a situation where me and the father aren't together anymore, or you want to shame him and put him into this horrible cycle of child support when nobody was able to bring this baby forward, when folks are getting paid 59 cents on a white man's dollar. They got to hear it as raw as it hits your body, as it hits your life. Right. So that's definitely my suggestion for how we advocate. That don't worry about all the flowery words. Don't worry about even understanding what reproductive justice means. Reproductive justice means you have the access to do what you need to do without a hindrance. And if there is a hindrance, you're not experiencing reproductive justice, period. And whatever that means for you, right? Whether or not you are formally incarcerated, whether you are a victim of intimate partner or domestic violence, whether you have been impacted because you identify as queer, whether you are, you know what I'm saying? And even if you are listening in and you happen to not be a person of color, but you happen to be white, right? If your human rights have been impacted, then you don't get to access the things that are to make sound decisions for your abundance, right? So for, you know, my suggestion is, you know, reach out. It's time to reach out to your legislators. It's time to connect to folks on the ground who are, you know, who are making those opportunities available. And it might not be that you may not kind of know where to go. I would start with your district, looking in your county, right? What's happening on the ground? Who's the mayor? Who's the city council? Who's the county commissioner? You know what I mean? Who's your state rep? Who's your senator? Who's your congressperson? And go from there. Who's your governor? And sending those folks, you know, the exact same letter. Y'all left me ass out. What do I do now? You know, that's it. That's, you know, it doesn't have to be so deep. And this is my zip code. I'm a voter. I'm a taxpayer. You owe me human rights, period. You know, that's definitely the answer that I would give for someone who doesn't know how to kind of break into this, didn't know that a Lori or a Monica or a Rodriguez were available to you, or SisterReach was available to you, but you still have issues and you still don't have an answer. Okay.
Thank you so much, Cherisse. I want to lift up something that we have in the chat from Lori, and it's, you know, we don't come to this work activists ready. There's no structure. You know, you go by your life experiences and you make sure that you are making sure your voice is heard and you're doing what needs to be done, not for just yourself, but your community, because it is so much bigger than the individuals on this panel. We are moving and we're doing this work for the generations to come. This does not end today. I would like to thank all of you for joining us. It's a special thing to our panelists. We really appreciate the work that you're doing to uplift Black women, the Black voice, and especially the work being done in the Deep South. For more information, I would like you all to follow SisterReach at SisterReach. That's on all social media panels and platforms. And in our own voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda at Black Women SRJ. Have a wonderful rest of your day, you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.